Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you here to our webinar we have going this afternoon. And I want to welcome our guest speakers, Doug Hoffman, the Executive Director of Normie, and Gavin McGregor Skinner, who is the Senior Director from ISSA, I believe. If I got your titles correct. If I didn't, I
That's
apologize,
correct.
but I think I
Good
got it
afternoon.
correctly. I'm glad you took the
They're
time.
just titles, Lance. They're not that important.
I know. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. In recent events of the hurricane or hurricanes that have gone by, we've started to notice a lot of things happening within our industry and a lot of the verticals around us. And a lot of it's concerning, and we wanted to bring it to everybody's attention and offer some options. That's the easiest way for me to explain this. We're going to try to talk about staying healthy as workers through these events that have just happened with the two hurricanes. A lot of the risks that are involved with exposure to mold, and there's a lot of myths out there that people hear and they try to run with without following the science. And I know these are terms that we use a lot in our industry, following the science especially, but people don't really do that. So I want to turn this over to Doug and let you just start off with an introduction as to what your feelings are with the response to Helene and Milton, the two hurricanes that just passed, and a lot of people are still reeling from both of them.
Yeah. Well, I think some things have changed a lot since we first experienced Hurricane Katrina in 2005. I think there's a lot that's been changed for the better, but unfortunately, some things seem to remain the same. And I remember when we did Katrina in 2005, one of the things that we were invited to do, which was really helpful to us and I think to the public, was to be able to hold seminars in the libraries and actually talk with folks about the things that they should be doing to not only know for sure that the work was being done correctly, but maybe more importantly was to how to protect themselves and make sure that they were protected from the health effects. And one of the things that prompted us to do that, Lance, in 2005, and why that was so important to talk about was, as you recall, just a few years earlier in 2001, when the towers fell, people were really concerned, and they began to realize that those health effects from that kind of disaster could go on for years. And as far as I know, it's still going on. And so it was pretty easy for us to talk about that in 2005. The unfortunate thing is that it seems as though we were dealing with kind of the same situation here. I see pictures of people dealing with contaminated environments with no kind of personal protection equipment at all. Volunteers jumping in, which of course we're always grateful for, but volunteers jumping in and doing work and not protecting themselves, not considering the potential health effects that they're dealing with. And then on the other side of that, you've got the problem with guys that really aren't licensed or trained to do some of the work. And so that's, in some ways it's changed, in some ways it's not changed. I think the government has been a much better, much better in their response. I don't think it's ever what we would want it to be, but I can tell you that they're better than they did in 2005. So that's how I see it. I see some things have gotten better, other things seem to remain the same.
Hey, Dr. Gavin, before we get into specifics, your take on what's been going on, just like Doug was saying.
Yeah, this is really important just to put everyone into the big picture of what's happening right now. So Normie, ISSA have an alliance. We're working together as Normie has promoted this initiative to create an environmental task force to actually respond to disasters and emergencies based on science and based on evidence. Now, for me this week, Tuesday night was not a good night. I had a whiskey tango foxtrot moment, and you should know what that means. And I went, I've got to ring Doug. And what happened through our Normie Environmental Task Force, Lance, people on the ground in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, working really hard during the day, get a bit of downtime when it's dark at night to make phone calls, contacted me and said, they're handing out bleach, sodium hypochlorite. And I said, to whom? Everyone. To do what? To prevent or clean the mold that's already there. We're actually seeing buildings right now in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia with mold growth, visible mold growth. And I said, oh, okay, it's okay. Probably a few 10, few hundred, containers of, yeah, we're not going to fight that battle. No, it's thousands of containers they're seeing in those different states. And that's a big problem. And straight away, I called Doug, and I said, look, we've got to be responsible here. This is where we're going now. We've just had Hurricane Helene. We've had Hurricane Milton. Let's make sure that this time we do what's based on science, based on evidence, and we do it with the right advice. And I think it's really important in this session we had today to talk with Doug, yourself, but also look at what's out there right now, what is wrong, and I'm going to use that word pretty strongly. It is wrong, and what is correct based on science and evidence.
You know, there's two different components to what you're talking about here. One is the effectiveness of bleach in this case on a mold environment. And the other one is the precautions and health risks to the people using it. So Doug, I don't know if you'd like to start with, I know you have a lot of research and data behind the effectiveness side, if you want to start there.
Yes, I'd be happy to. It's interesting because we were talking yesterday about this. The article that I wrote actually in 1998 was about how bleach should not be used to deal with mold. And so again, as I said, some things have changed, some things are better. I know Clorox, for instance, has a good portfolio of products that do include sodium hypochlorite and have been approved by the EPA to do work. So we're not talking about a specific company. What we're talking about is jug bleach, bleach that you would buy over the counter that has nothing in it except sodium hypochlorite. And I'm reckoning back again, Lance, to 2005 for Katrina. And I can remember one of the frustrating things was I'm at the library talking about don't use bleach, and it's being handed out by the gallon, and because it's inexpensive. But the problem that I knew then, and that we've continued to teach on, and I think the science is coming around, obviously, for people to realize that this is the case, is that unfortunately jug bleach will get rid of the staining, but it does not get down into the bioslime, as we call it, and actually destroy the mold that's there. And so oftentimes it'll come back. And of course, then you also have the health effects. We talked about a minute ago, PPE. What are they using? Are they using the right kind of mask, the right kind of gloves? If they're using bleach, are they mixing it with anything that's going to create a toxic environment? So that's our big concern, is how do they protect themselves, and then how do they utilize the right kind of chemistries that are not going to present problems for them, not only now, but later.
You know, Gavin, following up on what Doug said, looking at it from more on the medical side of protecting yourself, I want you to address that. But there's one other thing that you had mentioned in a previous interview where you were working overseas dealing with Ebola. And I remember you mentioning pits being dug around the tents and filled with bleach. The bleach had a specific purpose there for the bacteria, but where do you stand on it with the mold issue?
Yeah, good question, Lance. I'm going to just emphasize bleach, sodium hypochlorite, made from reacting chlorine with sodium hydroxide, is an excellent disinfectant and an antimicrobial agent. I'm going to make it really clear. In 1998, Doug Hoffman wrote, bleach doesn't kill mold. In 2024, I'm going to say again, bleach doesn't kill mold, but we're seeing it handed out. Now, in 2014, I had 3 trips to West Africa. We had the Ebola outbreaks. I was setting up Ebola hospitals and managing teams to run those hospitals. And our metric there was, Gavin, you're not safe. You don't smell strong enough. And what they were spraying me with was bleach. And you know, probably some people have heard the story. I lost my sense of taste and smell for months after my 3rd trip. You know, each deployment's about 21 days. After my 3rd deployment, I came back and went, I'm done. I can't do anymore. I've lost my taste. I've lost my sense of smell. My wife was great. Was very happy to see me to come back and said, I'm going to take you for the biggest steak you've ever seen in your life, because I hadn't eaten very much and lost a lot of weight on deployment like we always do. But the bleach had destroyed my sense of taste and smell. Now, so it's a good disinfectant. It's a good antimicrobial agent, but it doesn't kill mold. And I just wanted to highlight here, Lance, that this has been going on for a long time. Right now, let's get it really clear. The US Environmental Protection Agency, we call that the EPA, has a website. Should I use bleach to clean up mold? And what do they say on that website? Bleach is not recommended. So I'm going to put that in the chat so people can actually see that website. US Department of Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, we call that OSHA, on their website. They have a brief guide to mold in the workplace. Doug published his article in 1998. They published this website in 2013. They haven't changed it because it's correct. It says, the use of a biocide, such as chlorine bleach, is not recommended. And I'm going to put that website in the chat. This is from the EPA and from OSHA.
While you're typing that, I'm just going to give everybody a hint on finding these sites if they can't use the link. The first one would be just do a search on EPA and mold to clean, or I'm sorry, and bleach to clean mold, and it'll come up with these sites, and you'll see exactly what it's talking about. And the same thing with OSHA. It would be OSHA and bleach as a biocide or bleach killing mold, and you will see this information that Gavin is talking about.
And this is where it gets really, really critical and really important here, Lance. I used to work for the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I was an Epidemic Intelligence Service Officer, an EISO. Loved that job, had a fantastic job, did fantastic things with Ebola and many other highly infectious diseases like avian influenza or bird flu, tuberculosis, malaria. Really had a great career. Really enjoyed working at CDC. But, and I'm going to be very critical, the CDC has a website. It's called Guidelines for Cleaning Safely After Disaster. So Guidelines for Cleaning Safely After Disaster is the CDC website. Now, American Red Cross, many other volunteer organizations, many other non-government organizations, even local government officials, state government officials, all reference that website, the CDC website. And on that CDC website, it says, clean up mold with a mix of bleach and water. And that website was just updated February 9th, 2024, and it still has it there. Clean up mold with a mix of bleach and water as a guideline for cleaning safely after a disaster. I'm going to put that in the chat as well, Lance, and that's our problem. Doug wrote the article in 1998. OSHA, Department of Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Administration published a website that's still up to date in 2013. Bleach is not recommended. EPA says bleach is not recommended. The US Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, says use bleach. Who's right, who's wrong? CDC is wrong.
One of the things that comes out of this is basic communications. When you say bleach, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Bleach can be very watered down. It can be extremely, extremely strong. And I think the problem that we run into is people don't know the difference. Well, they said to use bleach, that's what I'm using, and it may not be effective. It's like when COVID came out and people were looking for alcohol that had to be over, I believe it was 90% isopropyl alcohol to have any real effect. People were just grabbing whatever they could find. So understanding the full meaning of what you're saying of using bleach, like the CDC was saying, is where you could create a toxic environment, dangerous to your health. I mean, you have to survive the cure, basically, in those situations with proper training, PPE and everything else.
And unfortunately, Lance, I was a victim of overuse of bleach because our metric was when I came out of the Ebola hospital, which Ebola scares me. There's no doubt about it. It's a virus that I really get worried about when I'm treating patients or working in a hospital. But when I came out of the hospital, they went, Gavin, you don't smell strong enough. So they re-sprayed me with more bleach. We're in 2024 now, and we've got to go back to the science, go back to the evidence.
So the picture,
there's another side of this, Lance, that we haven't really talked a lot about, but I think it's interesting to note. We've been talking about folks' health and sodium hypochlorite, but there's another issue with jug bleach if you're talking about a long time solution, because apparently from what we've seen and learned, that once you've cleaned the surface with bleach, it may set up a surface environment, a pH, that will not allow the protectants to bond to that surface. So if you're using a protectant that will keep the mold from coming back later, it may not even bond to the surface because of the pH that's the acidic environment, I think, that's left after the bleach has been put on that surface. So it's just another factor that I think we're learning more and more about.
Well, isn't it also an issue where bleach is really a large or made up a large component of water, which as they start to separate over time and leach in different directions, one could be feeding the mold growth while the other one is inactive because it doesn't have the water to drive it? You
I
know,
don't
it's
know
a
if I can,
chemistry. Yeah,
I was just going to say, I don't know if I can speak to that specifically, but I do know that, yes, you're talking about a very small percentage of uh, sodium hypochlorite compared to a huge percentage of water. And I don't think adding water to a potential mold issue is probably a good idea.
And you're right, Lance. A lot of the guidelines out there are misleading. They're not, the lack of specificity. I often hear that, oh yeah, we took bleach concentrate, bleach, and we put 1 cup of bleach into a gallon of water. That 1 cup, 1 gallon, idea that you can clean everything, disinfect everything with 1 cup, 1 gallon. No, that's not how it is. And there actually requires, when you're doing dilution, more precision in the measurements. And so if I'm hearing from colleagues on the ground through the NORMI Environmental Task Force in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia that they're handing out sodium hypochlorite bleach, we don't have a lot of details on the products or how that's being handed out, but we know a lot that's been handed out. There are no use guidelines. So where are the use guidelines? And then, as you correctly said, Lance, before, where are the safety guidelines? And that's really critical. And then when you go to safety, they start talking about, and even on the CDC guidelines for cleaning safely after disaster, right at that very top of that page is get the right safety gear. They talk about eye protection. They just mention goggles, but they don't give any details on what goggles are. They talk about N95 masks, or as we call them, N95 respirators. Where are you going to get those from? Have you been fit tested from them? Do you know how to use an N95 respirator the way it was designed to be used? Heavy work gloves. What does that mean? Is it Lowe's? Is it Home Depot? Is it Amazon? Where am I going to heavy work? Be more specific. Waterproof boots with steel toes and insoles, not just steel shank. Okay, fair enough. Earplugs or protective headphones, and at least 2 fire extinguishers. And then it says, is sewage involved? Now, we just saw the storm surge for Hurricane Milton. We know how toxic and dangerous that water is. We saw on TV, and you and I discussed this just yesterday, people in t-shirt and shorts walking through waist-deep water, celebrating that the storm surge wasn't so high they survived in toxic water. But here on the CDC website, it says, is sewage involved? Yes, it is. All that water has to be considered toxic because we're not testing it for water quality. Make sure to wear rubber boots, rubber gloves, and goggles if sewage is involved, which I agree to, but be more specific, add some more details, help all these wonderful people, again, that we know of that have deployed, or even the building owners and the homeowners, be more specific in how they protect themselves safely. And that detail is lacking.
We talked the other day about something similar to this where, the rescuers, the people going in right away in the water like you're talking about, well, I had my tetanus shot, I'm good to go. That only does one piece of things that you could be exposed to. So proper PPE, understanding it, knowing how to use it. You mentioned the N95 mask. That doesn't do anything for the fumes given off by these chemistries. The fumes from chlorine and stuff like that. So, I mean, just because you have a mask on doesn't mean you're protected. So there's a whole series of issues that come up with this with lack of information. And Doug, I know that's a lot of the training that we through NORMI and the Environmental Task Force try to push. And I mean, it's got to start there.
Yeah, well, I wish we had more and more opportunities. Maybe this will give us the chance to speak to the public, to be able to have those forums and the libraries or with the businesses, to be able to talk with them ahead of a storm. Hey, you've prepared for a nuclear war. How would you like to prepare for a nuclear microbial war? Let us tell you how that works. And I wish we had more and more opportunities to speak to the public and let the public know ahead of time before they get into this situation what it is that they need to do. And of course, that's one of the purposes of our videos that we have, flood.normie.org and hurricane.normie.org. That's one of the reasons why we have those, is for hopefully the public will see that before they get themselves into a jam. And that's the real challenge. And I thank Dr. Gavin for working so hard to help us get this out in front of the public with his influence and his resources. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to talk directly eye to eye with these folks who need protection, whether they're a volunteer or whether they're actual resident. Both sides of the coin. Somebody coming from Tennessee to work on some building in Naples, Florida, he needs to know how to protect himself.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point, Doug. In a post-disaster situation, we do very well with chainsaw safety.
Yeah.
Because we know a chainsaw is going to hurt you if you're not trained properly on how to safely use a chainsaw. What protective equipment should you wear when you use a chainsaw? How do you operate the chainsaw? How do you maintain the chainsaw? Why do we not take that same chainsaw philosophy, approach, practices to cleaning up and looking for mold, or preventing mold, or taking out mold? Why do we not use the same principles of chainsaw safety when it comes to pressure washer safety? And that always seems to be a step down for me.
Well, and you want to have that balance, which I think is one of the reasons why it's difficult to do. And frankly, I think together we can reach that balance. I've always said in our classes, people talk about mold. Well, it's been around since Leviticus. What's the big deal? That's one extreme. Then you've got the other extreme. Oh, you got mold in your house, tear it down and build a new house. Well, the truth, like so many things, is in the middle between those two extremes. And I think us being able to talk about, here's how you protect yourself. Nobody's trying to scare you to death. We're just trying to tell you that it's a concern and you do have the ability to make sure that you do it correctly. Don't look at it as if it's no big deal.
So let's move over to some of the myths that are going on, because I think that's the next piece of this that we really need to talk about. We've talked about what doesn't work or what doesn't work well. What does work for taking care of the mold problems? If you want to address that. Either one of you, whoever wants to jump in here.
Well, I can tell you.
I'll start, then I'll hand it over to you, Doug. Those websites that we've shown have to be corrected, and hopefully we'll have this discussion to do that. More importantly, we've said, straight out, bleach does not kill mold, but we're seeing it being used. The challenges that we have also then, Lance, is that, the Federal Emergency Management Agency website talks about hurricane cleanup hurricane cleanup for your property and how to do it safely. And it says on that website, clean and disinfect everything that got wet. We know we can't disinfect everything that got wet, so that's wrong. US Department of Housing and Urban Development, we call that the HUD. Their website says, dealing with the aftermath, steps to take for a storm-damaged home, clean with hot water with laundry or dish detergent. How do you get hot water in an emergency in a disaster that has no electricity? So, and why are they even saying hot water? For when it comes to restoring, remediating, and getting these buildings back into a safe indoor condition. And so there are alternatives, and I'll hand that over to Doug, but because the problem is that many of these websites say, yeah, I totally agree. EPA, OSHA, I agree with you. Don't use bleach, but then you don't give the solution.
Gavin, real quick, you used the term to use hot water. Words mean things. What is hot water? Does it have to be boiling? Does it have to be where you can't touch it? Is it warm? There's no explanation there to your point as to what it actually means.
Well, let me just put that FEMA website in there right now that says clean and disinfect everything that got wet. And in our industry, we have definitions for clean, we have definitions for disinfect. That's not possible. The US Department of Housing and Urban Development, which we call the HUD, talks about clean with hot water and laundry or dish detergent. Yep, fine. But again, as you correctly said, Lance, how hot is hot? What is hot? And how do you do it in a post-disaster situation?
Yeah, let me speak for a moment, if I could, to chemistries, because I think that that's a really important part of this process. Sometimes you absolutely need to use some sort of chemical to get things actually clean and to kill the microbes that are there. One of the things that we did last week was we sent a case of enzyme cleaner to Florida, to a church down there that needed some help, and they were looking for what kind of chemistries to use. And it was a natural, 100% biodegradable, water-based type of enzyme cleaner. Hydrogen peroxide, vinegar. There are a lot of things that really work. And to Dr. Gavin's point, he's exactly right. It's frustrating when somebody says, don't use this. And we learned that unless you have an alternative. And that's what we learned, remember when we started Normie in 2004 and we were doing training, and we would say, now you don't want to use bleach. And what was the first question? Well, then what should I use? And so I think the point is that you want to be careful, obviously, with the client that you're working with, or maybe the individual resident needs to be careful that they're using something that they can tolerate. Make sure you've got a SDS sheet, understand what the ingredients are, protect yourself just like it tells you to. And I'll just tell you, if most people actually read an SDS sheet for Windex, they'd be dealing with it completely differently. But read those SDS sheets, enzyme cleaners, botanicals, natural products, hydrogen peroxide. There are a lot of alternatives, and that's why we just want to get the word out.
It's important to understand what the product will take care of, as well as what it won't take care of. And you can't do the substitution in your mind saying, well, if it kills this, it's going to kill that. Because we're dealing with completely different entities between molds, bacteria, viruses. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, and they're susceptible to different things.
No, and you're right, Lance. And I just want to reiterate what we're talking about this time that we've been on. Bleach, sodium hypochlorite, is an excellent disinfectant. It's an antimicrobial agent. It doesn't kill mold. As Doug has correctly said, white distilled vinegar, hydrogen peroxide. I'm going to throw a question out to you, Doug. I get a lot of calls in the last probably 48 hours. Sodium borate, borax. pH of 9 creates an alkaline environment. We know it kills mold. I see some use, but not a lot of use in a post-disaster situation. What do you think about sodium borate, borax?
I love it. I just think it's hard to pronounce. No, it is. I think it's hard to find. But no, I agree 100%. And I think it's been proven over and over again that fungus will not grow in alkaline environments. And so having something like that, I think it's a great idea.
And so
you probably know that one of the real effective cleaning processes to mechanically remove mold from rafters and from flooring and so forth is soda blasting. And that's baking soda, So it's a great option, I think.
So here's our problem, and it is a problem. We've had people on the ground through the Normie Environmental Task Force, and we've done a number of videos with Mason Tamano. We did some videos with Jeff Cross. We got those out. We've had phone calls from the front line saying they're handing out, and I thought it was a few 10 or maybe 100 units of, it's thousands. What I'm hearing is thousands of units of bleach sodium hypochlorite. How do we transfer that? How do we change that to say, why aren't we seeing thousands of units of white distilled vinegar, hydrogen peroxide, borax, baking soda? Why? Just why is that not happening? And why do we still have sites like the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, with their guidelines for cleaning safely after a disaster, saying clean up with mold with a mix of bleach and water? Why is that happening in 2024?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with just resources, frankly. Sodium hypochlorite is pretty inexpensive, and it's pretty easy to give away. I'll just plug, if I could, the Normie Pro ETF.org. It's a 501(c)(3). It's anything you donate to that's just like donating to the Red Cross, fully tax deductible. Dr. Gavin, if we had thousands and thousands of dollars, how easy it would be to provide that kind of product and those kinds of services to those disaster areas. It's just, limited resources. And I would love more than anything else to overwhelm those trucks that are bringing sodium hypochlorite in with trucks that are bringing in something that really actually works.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Doug. I'm so grateful to the members of ISSA, the members of Normie that have reached out to us, but more all those that have left their families and gone and deployed themselves and responded to Hurricane Helene. And now we're seeing, big deployments from our members for Hurricane Milton. And again, we're going to have boots on the ground. The key is the message has to be clear, it has to be loud, it has to be specific on how to do things safely, but more importantly, based on science.
Well, the Environmental Task Force, Doug, you just mentioned, I mean, we do a lot of training, and it's all about educating not only the public, but the contractors, the people that are doing the work. And if you're a contractor in any of these industries, water drawing, remediation, assessment, you've come across people that are getting educated themselves. So you need to be educated to be able to talk to your customer. The last thing you want to do is have your customer more knowledgeable than you are.
Lance, this is the kind of thing that's interesting. We talked about this morning in our admin meeting. We've got a class coming up here in Louisiana in the first week in November. We've got a class scheduled in Tampa the first week in December. Those are scheduled classes on our website. And you know what's happening already. There's people coming out of the woodwork. Hey, I need to get trained. I need to get trained. Where a year ago it was, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. And so I know it's like everything else. When there's a fire, you want to put on your fire suit and put it out. And so hopefully people will find out about this, the classes that we've got available that will help them with licensing and certification in the states that require it and in the states that don't require it.
And that's really important, Doug. People have to be making decisions for what we're seeing on the ground. And it's so important that through our Normie members, our ISSA members, we get to those decision makers and go, I know you're trying to do your best. I know you're trying to make, decisions that will help create safe indoor spaces, will recover from this disaster. But more importantly, how to do it based on science, based on evidence, based on a better process, a better methodology. So again, let's work as a team to do this. But it's so important that, again, if you're an ISSA member and or Normie member and you're on the ground and you see things, let us know, because Doug, Lance, myself will more than happy intervene and contact the mayor's office or contact the local emergency management agency. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. If I have to go down and talk to a federal government agency, that's not a problem. And I'll stand up and say, that's wrong, this is better, this is right. And really get that change. It has to happen now.
Yeah, Dr. Gavin, it's interesting. We've been talking the last several years about essential employees and what that meant during COVID. And we've said for years, and I think it's absolutely true, that our water mitigators, our wet restoration contractors, our remediators, our assessors, they really are the first responders to these kinds of events. They're not identified as first responders, but they absolutely are. They're some of the first ones in there to get things going. And so, if you anticipate a fire in your house, you have a fire extinguisher for a reason. And I think that's the whole idea of getting trained ahead of these kinds of events, because now you're ready. We've talked about FEMA training and all of those sorts of things. Now you're ready to actually be able to be value to those people who need you.
Hey, Doug, that example you just gave about the fire extinguisher is so appropriate here, because having the fire extinguisher in your house is very important. But when the fire breaks out, you don't want to take out the instruction manual on how to use the fire extinguisher. You need to know ahead of time. You need to be familiar with the equipment, train, understand what it can do and what it can't do. You can use a fire extinguisher and create more of a problem. So there's a lot of things that go into training. And Gavin, we talk about tabletops all the time. That's the kind of concept that needs to be out here, and to have all of these valid and scientific facts brought into our training.
Yeah, and what we're seeing, Lance, and it's, we've seen both with Hurricane Katrina 2005, Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Ian. I can name all these hurricanes off, Helene, recently with Hurricane Milton. These are water events. These are water damaging events. I had a phone call from some colleagues that are both doctors and nurses down in Florida who were in the hospital saying, look, the storm surge didn't reach what people predicted. but we got 2 foot of water through our house, and the house is now unlivable, and I'm going to have to stay in the hospital now before I can go home. What do I do, Gavin? What do we do with a house that had 2 feet of surge and is now unlivable? Okay, it didn't reach the 5, 10, or 15 that we all predicted or that we thought could have been the potential. 2 feet's enough to make a house unlivable. And everyone should be seeing those videos on TV right now from Hurricane Helene, as well as the flooding, as well as the surge from Hurricane Milton, going 1, 2 feet. That's enough to make a building unlivable, unusable. And that's the message that's not getting out there right now at the moment, Lance. So that's where this, again, the training that Normie does, but more importantly, the awareness of key decision makers is so critical. And as you're right, as we do these tabletop exercises, which I'm involved a lot through my affiliation with different organizations as we prepare for hurricane season, it's predictable. What I'm not seeing is that recovery is always a key part of the disaster cycle. And those that are involved in recovery are our members. They don't make the exercises. They don't come to the tabletops, and that has to change, because we've gone very quickly from response, search and rescue, water rescue, now to recovery. And our members are going down there right now, if not deployed for Helene, they're deploying for Milton, and they haven't been considered by both federal, state, local government, as well as non-government, as well as volunteer organizations, as a key part of the recovery effort. And they are. Drying a building is based on science. Responding to and preventing mold growth is based on science. And the point is that we have to do better at that. And that's something that Doug and you and I are all working towards. And our goal right now is, did we do well in 2024? Not well enough. Are we going to do better in 2020? Are we going to do better in 2025? Yes, we have to.
I want to move back to the 3 points or topics that we originally started here. But just before I do that, I just want to put out there, if anybody's interested in getting more information on the Environmental Task Force from Normie, you can go to Normie Pro ETF, EchoTangoFrank.org. And that's got a lot of information on that page, including how to join the Environmental Task Force and Project Safe, which we've utilized to have our members all over the country check in with us, let us know that they're okay. We actually use the term I am okay, which is I'm okay. So, it's more information that you can get. With that being said, what our original topics were, you must stay safe and healthy, health risks for mold exposure, and the myths of this industry. I'm going to put it back out there if you guys want to sum up these points and
I do have one thing that I do have one thing I'd like to do, which I haven't really said yet, but I think we should ask this question. One of the things that we've learned is that Normie has grown because we have really good people, well-trained in the field, and because they look good, we look good. Can I just say that we see ourselves as being able to have an army of well-trained folks out there who can touch the lives of people we have not even met. And I say that to say this: I'm sure there's someone on this call who's listening who could get us in front of the people who make these kinds of decisions. And if you can do that, please reach out to us and let us know. If somebody's willing to talk or listen, we're willing to talk and to show them how important it is that they do things the right way. We love those kind of opportunities. So I just wanted to put that out there. Help us get this information out to people who need it.
Help us help you is really the expression that I like to use. But Gavin?
Yeah, and the other thing, Lance, get the right safety gear. Practice wearing and using that safety gear before you deploy. I work with highly infectious diseases, or there's those diseases of high consequence. I practice in the dark because most of the time when I'm working, the lights go out. And if I can't put on my personal protective equipment and take it off in the dark, then I'm going to fail in the real world situation. So get the right personal protective gear. If you're deployed, pace yourself. I see so many people run in and it's hot, it's humid, it's an austere environment. There are dangers there. There are hazards there. Pace yourself, ensure you've got, a lot of these places now still don't have electricity, access to clean water, access to clean and safe drinking water. Stay hydrated. If you're going to take so much precautions and training when using a chainsaw, then apply those same principles to pressure washing, and apply those same principles to cleaning up after the hurricane or the disaster, the flood event, to prevent mold. And the other thing is that I see often, and we saw this on TV. You and I talked about this yesterday, Lance. Don't underestimate the danger of floodwater. It's toxic. And it's toxic because it has sewage in it, it has agricultural products in it, it has contaminants in it, it has all sorts of things in floodwater. And I think people underestimate what floodwater, the health risk that floodwater can pose to you, and understand that if you get open cuts or sores, which you will, that are exposed to floodwater, you've got to clean them, you've got to wash them with soap, you've got to ensure that they don't get infected. I deploy a lot in disasters, and I see a lot of skin infections. And so it's really important that don't underestimate the hazards that are in that environment you're going to help after a flood event, which we're seeing from these hurricanes right now. And I think that's the problem. I see people working right now in short sleeve t-shirts and shorts. Not on my team. Doesn't happen.
Common sense is the term that comes to mind here. The unfortunate part about common sense is people think they all use it. And common sense isn't something you're born with. It's something you learn. You've learned how to do things, and then you make your decisions based on that. How many times have you been to a disaster site where you see firemen running around full breathable pack scuba systems because they've been in fires, forest fires or house fires? They come out, they take off their breathing equipment. What's the first thing they do? Light up a cigarette. It's just not something that makes sense, though it's what people do in the heat of the moment.
No, you're so correct, Lance. The people that respond to disasters within our network are the most wonderful people you could work with in the world. And they become, very good friends because we all have the same commitment to service. The challenge I've had with so many deployments in disasters and emergencies is that those responders had to be rescued.
Yep.
They didn't drink enough. They didn't stay hydrated. They didn't know how to treat cuts and wounds or abrasions, and that got infected, and suddenly we had to get them out of the deployment area. They had to get them out of the disaster area because they just didn't understand what it took to keep themselves healthy and safe in working in such an environment.
Which then becomes more of a draw on the workers that are still there trying to work, taking care of the rescuers. So yes, it's a downward spiral when that starts to happen. Gentlemen, we're coming up on close to 45 minutes here. Anything else you'd like to cover that we didn't? I mean, we're pretty much open at this point. Anything that we have missed?
There was a couple of topics in the chat there, Lance.
Oh, let's see what we have here. I appreciate the feedback, very helpful. As someone who's just returning home from a fire department after Milton's landfall, with extensive water damage throughout the structure. I'm just shortening up fairly long here where it was written. What are the solutions you all offer for public servants to boost the message out to the community? Suggestions on what they can do. Offer free training to your emergency services. We have a program called FRAP, First Responders Awareness Program, where we help you provide instructions to your emergency service organizations how to protect themselves. It's pretty standard stuff, but you have to hear it over and over and over. Anything else, guys?
Well, I was just thinking about being bold enough to actually even address the issue. Sometimes people are kind of wary about promoting something that may look like they're trying to help themselves, but the truth of the matter is that when you are bold enough to be able to talk to folks who need to hear this, the decision makers, when you're bold enough to do that, think about how many hundreds and thousands of people that you are helping who are out there in the marketplace just trying to survive. And I think, as Dr. Gavin said, we forget sometimes about those folks that had just a little bit of a problem, but it's, it's their house. It's a big problem. and it's something that they need to be able to take care of in the right sort of way.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's a
the
good.
first responders also need to be able to take care of their families and themselves to be able to have the time to go and be first responders. So that's another part of the equation that we didn't address tonight, but it's one of the important pieces. With Katrina, they learned where they had hundreds and hundreds of buses, school buses, staged to evacuate people, but all the people that were driving the buses were evacuated. This is the kind of thing that common sense doesn't take care of, but you need to be trained and have a plan for it.
Yeah, be respectful, Lance. If you're deploying down to a disaster, people are traumatized, they're upset, they've lost personal belongings, their businesses, the buildings, both home and commercial, have been damaged. Be respectful. Be good. Be a good listener. But more importantly, when you go back to the emergency operations center and they're telling you to go faster, that's not always possible. And there's times where I've been leading teams, I'm going, stop. That's going to make this whole situation, which is already unsafe, and it's going to increase the risk for injury and damage. We have to slow down. That's not safe to go in there. That building has been closed. The windows have been closed. The door has been closed. There's sandbags at the front. It got flooded. It's been a week to 10 days before anyone's opened that. And you want me to go in there and do what? And if they don't have the proper personal protective equipment, the gear, the safety gear, you can't rush into those buildings. And that's so important. Again, have good decision makers, good management, good leadership, and then you've used that word common sense. I try not to use that in a disaster situation. I try to focus on the hazards. I try to risk, and I say, what's the worst that can happen? And I start that with all my conversations, because people they rush. When they go fast, they get hurt.
There's a very good comment here that I want to put out to both of you and whoever wants to jump in on. There's a few things here. As a follow-up, community members are asking us directly, what do we do? What cleaner should we use? If not bleach, what? We're already getting those questions from our community members.
So I think there's a couple of links, and he identifies this, that's Ryan. A couple of links I put into the chat area, one for volunteers and one for residents, and that's in our Normie Pro ETF. But we also have a great section of our normie.org webpage on the very bottom, resources for the do-it-yourselfer. And I think that's a really, really powerful little paragraph. It's got several links in there. I was just looking at it again. I know we have a resource library that will help them with getting information that they need, accurate information. There's information there about enzyme cleaners. I also have my book there, Mold-Free Construction. So I think there are a lot of resources at the bottom of normie.org that would really help give you the tools that you need. And I'll tell you, Ryan, if I were there, I'm in Louisiana right now, but if I were there, I would take those flyers and I would be printing a bunch of them out and probably handing them out to everybody I know, walking up and down the street. That you talk about how you could help. I think that would be phenomenal, is just getting that information out.
Just try to pay attention to the addresses that we're giving you. The chat may not be available if you go back to watch this as a replay. It's normie.org is one of them. And the other one that we gave out a few times was normieproetf.org. And from there, you can access a lot of information. Gavin, I'm not sure if you had another site you wanted to give out.
No, I totally agree with Doug. Let's again the challenge we have, and I think we've correctly and we've been good citizens on this webinar by showing the U.S. government, at the federal government level, which also then translates to what's at state government, local government, as well as those other wonderful organizations that respond. The information at the moment is misleading. In some situations, it's completely wrong. In some situations, there's not enough detail to be able to do a job that keep you safe. So really important. If we get too many mixed messages, as we're seeing right now, and we've talked about in this webinar, it leads to unsafe, or it leads to actions that aren't based on science and evidence, and that leads to mistakes. So it's really important that these events aren't going to go away, Lance. This is just, we've had 2 hurricanes, both made landfall, caused significant hardship, significant damage, significant problems, and we're seeing from our wonderful ISSA members and NORMI members on the ground right now, real reports that things are not being done the best that they can do, and there are ways to do this better.
Doug, any last comments here?
I don't think so, except that I just want to really thank again Dr. Gavin for being here. A great asset. He's been a big help to us, and just thank you so much to him and ISSA. This has been a great collaboration and a good partnership. I'm looking forward to the great things that we're going to be able to accomplish together.
Yeah, it is important, Doug. I'm glad we met all those years ago. I'm glad that but more importantly, we're doing this as it's a team. It's a true collaboration through our NORMI ISSA Alliance, and there's room for many, many more partners.
Thank you both for taking the time to be here. We appreciate it. And everybody else that's watching, thank you. And I'm sure there'll be more information coming out in the near future. And please be safe, whatever your involvement is with this disaster.